Wait, crayons? Don't talk about crayons. Crayons? Crayons?
What's happening? What's going on? Kevin was right! Winter is coming and we don't have a man! Oh my god. What's happening? What's going on? Kevin was right! Winter is coming and we don't have a man! Oh my god.
Hey, are you independent? Do you not need no man? That's fine. You can always call 1-800 Call a Bear. Call a bear. Hook up with your bear today. Warning, this content creator will not be held responsible if you get eaten alive by that bear.
I'm done with life, and it's all Jermaine's fault. It's always Jermaine's fault. I'm done.
What's good, everybody? AB Media 83 here, and welcome to AB Media 83 Daily. Hope everybody's doing all right tonight. Hope y'all enjoy the new intro because that is the new intro. Hope everybody's doing all right tonight. Tonight, we are going to be talking about the Moynihan Report. Yes, the Moynihan Report. Now, BGS has done plenty on the Moynihan Report, but what maybe what sparked this stream today is Dr. Torrin Rocker and Dr. Tommy Curry went over the Moynihan Report, and I thought it would be a good idea to cover it. But before we do that, be sure to refresh the page because I just put it in there. I have a copy of. If you look at my description, I do have a copy of the Moynihan Report, and I have the link to BGS's playlist on the Moynihan Report. Oh yes, BGS has a very nice playlist of covering the Moynihan Report. In fact, before we watched Dr. Tommy Curry's video, Dr. Turning and Dr. Walker and Dr. Curry's video, we're going to watch a couple of BGS's videos. So let's get started. And just for a little history reference, if I'm not mistaken, Richard Moynihan was Lyndon Baines Johnson's. No, we're not going to read the whole report. But Lyndon Baines Johnson's labor secretary, and they had to figure out how they were going to integrate Negroes into Black people into the system. And Moynihan wrote a report on this, and make a long story short, it's about 60 pages. Yes, I've read through some of it. He was highlighting a lot of the problems in the Black community, and unfortunately, since he's written that, a lot of the problems have gotten worse. But when he released the report, the Black intelligentsia rejected it, and unfortunately, you're going to kind of hear that in Dr. Curry and Dr. Walker's commentary. But to give you an idea of what was in the Moynihan Report, let's get started. All right, let's see here.
to thank Bill for his excellent address. I know Pat Moynihan would have been proud to have a lecture like that associated with his name. When he was writing his famous report in 1965, he was Assistant Secretary of Labor in the Johnson administration. And he was trying to push LBJ towards a full employment policy that would cost millions and millions of dollars. Unfortunately, and I think tragically for the United States, millions of dollars were spent in the swamps of Vietnam and not in the cities of the United States.
Sad but true.
And between 1965 and 1960.
For those who haven't read it, Moynihan basically argued that if you, because what they were trying to do is they were trying to save money on welfare. And he said if you wanted to do that in the black community, you have to give black men jobs. And the black intelligentsia rejected that. So, yeah. Let's continue.
68, rather than pulling poor urban minority members out of poverty, cities exploded in a series of riots that destroyed urban infrastructure and further compromised jobs. And when the Kerner Commission issued its report in 1968, it pointed to the lack of jobs in America's black ghettos as the principal cause of the wave of urban riots.
And that's one of the reasons Moynihan wrote the report, to solve this issue.
All of the problems that Moynihan saw in 1968 came to pass. And we're now in the grips of another recession with high rates of joblessness, not only for poor blacks, poor Latinos, but increasingly poor whites, working class whites with less than college educations.
She'll probably won't.
Despite the heavy downturn in 2008, we haven't had a rise in violence in our cities. Partially, I think, or probably completely, because Obama's stimulus money was heavily targeted towards low-income urban areas. But that's gone. The last time that a major appeal was made for a full employment economy, something that we could well afford, we squandered the chance. We can only hope that our political leaders today will listen to the words of Bill Wilson and avoid needless pain and suffering that resulted from ignoring the words of Pat Moynihan back in 1965. So on behalf of the Academy,
Patrick Moynihan, excuse me,
the Moynihan Prize Committee, I want to thank Bill for his excellent address that set a high bar for future Moynihan lectures, and invite all of you to enjoy some refreshments and congratulate Bill in person for his wonderful speech. Thank you all.
Okay, folks, take two. This is the last chapter of the Moynihan Report about the Negro family. And this is the case for national action. This is not the remedy, but the closing. The object of this study has been to define a problem rather than propose solutions to it. We have kept within these confines for three reasons. First, there are many persons within and without the government who do not feel the problem exists, at least in any serious degree. These persons feel that with the legal obstacles to assimilation out of the way, notice the word assimilation.
Yep.
Notice the word assimilation.
Yes, sir.
The goal of integration, the goal of the civil rights
It's called admixture for a reason.
legislation was always assimilation, not equality,
Mm-hmm.
assimilation. Continuing, these persons feel that with the legal obstacles to assimilation out of the way, matters will take care of themselves in the normal course of events. This is a fundamental issue and requires a decision within the government.
Mm-hmm.
Second, it is our view that the problem is so interrelated, one thing with another, that any list of program proposals would necessarily be incomplete and would distract attention from the main point of interrelatedness. We have shown a clear relation between male unemployment, for example, and the number of welfare dependent children. Employment, in turn, reflects educational achievements, which depends in a large part on family stability, which reflects employment. Chicken and the egg. It's a cycle. Where we should break into this cycle and how are the most difficult domestic questions facing the United States. We must first reach an agreement on what the problem is. Then we will know what questions must be answered. Third, it is necessary to acknowledge the view held by a number of responsible persons that this problem may in fact be out of control. And in fact, it was. This view with which are we emphatically and totally disagree, and they were wrong about that, but the view must be acknowledged. The persistent rise in Negro educational achievement is probably the main trend that belies this thesis. On the other hand, our study has produced some clear indications that the situation may have indeed begun to feed upon itself.
Mm-hmm.
It may be noted, for example, that for the most of the post-war period, male Negro unemployment and the number of new AFDC rate cases rose and fell together, as if connected by a chain from 1948 to 1962. The correlation between the two series of data was an astonishing 91%. This would mean that 83% of the rise and fall in AFDC cases can be statistically ascribed to the rise and fall in the unemployment rate. In 1960, however, for the first time, unemployment declined, but the number of new AFDC cases rose. In 1963, this happened a second time. In 1964, a third. The possible implications of these and other data are serious enough that they too should be understood before the program proposals are made. However, the argument of this paper does lead to one central conclusion. Wherever the specific elements of a national effort designed to resolve this problem, those elements must be coordinated in terms of one general strategy. What then is that problem? We feel the answer is clear. 3 centuries of injustice have brought about deep-seated structural distortions in the life of the Negro American. At this point, the present tangle of pathology is capable of perpetuating itself without assistance from the white world. In other words,
Directly from Clark's book, Dark Ghetto.
if racism ended tomorrow, because of the tangle of pathology, the problems with black people will still continue. The cycle can be broken only if these distortions are set right. In a word, a national effort reports the problems of Negro Americans must be directed towards the questions of family structure.
Mm-hmm.
The object should be to strengthen the Negro family so as to enable it to raise and support its members as do other families. After that, how this group of Americans choose to run its affairs, take advantage of its opportunities, or fail to do so is none of the nation's business. In other words, after we fix you and get you up to speed, you're on your own. The fundamental importance and urgency of restoring the Negro American family structure has been evident for some time. E. Franklin Frazier put it most succinctly in 1950. As a result of family disorganization, a large proportion of Negro children and youth have not undergone the socialization.
Bear in mind, this was written in the 1960s, over 60 years ago. It's gotten much. Our black people's situation has gotten much worse since then. The family is not together like it was back in those days. And this is what they were talking about back then,
which only the family can provide. The disorganized families have failed to provide for their emotional needs and have not provided the discipline and habits which are necessary for personality development. Because the disorganized family has failed in its function as a socializing agency, it has handicapped the children in their relationship to the instructions in the community. Moreover, family disorganization has been partially responsible for a large amount of juvenile delinquency and adult crime among American Negroes. Where have we seen that before? Since the widespread family disorganization among Negroes has resulted from the failure of the father to play the role in family life required by American society, the mitigation of this problem must await those changes in the Negro and American society which will enable the Negro father to play the required role. In other words, nothing can be done until you fix what's wrong with the black male. Until you get him trained and employed and up to snuff where he can do his job, the rest
take care of the family.
The rest of the stuff is going to fall apart.
Yep,
that's what they were trying to say. Nothing was done in response to Frazier's argument. Matters were left to take care of.
Around, I believe it was around 1/3 of households was raised by single mothers. It's now up to 70+% in the black community. Black children are raised by single mothers now. Let that sink in. Let that sink in.
Of themselves as matters will, grew worse, not better. Matters were left to take care of themselves, and as matters will, grew worse, not better. The problem is now more serious, the obstacles greater. There is, however, a profound change for the better in one respect. The president has committed to the nation to an all-out effort to eliminate.
And if May is walking, she's blocked. Her main channel is blocked from speaking on my chat. He's reading directly from the Moynihan Report.
Poverty wherever it exists, among whites or Negroes, and a militant, organized, and responsible Negro movement exists to join in that effort. Such a national effort could be stated thus: the policy of the United States is to bring the Negro American to full and equal sharing in the responsibilities and rewards of citizenship.
Yep.
To this end, the programs of the federal government bearing on this objective shall be designed to have the effect, direct or indirectly, of enhancing the stability and the resources of the Negro American family.
Okay, we're going to stop there. It's about 20 minutes because I got to get some other videos to get to. So
he had his PhD from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. It was on the International Labor Organization and was never published. But he had he was widely read, and he had information from historical sources as well as contemporary activists in it. There were no errors in it. Nobody ever criticized what his facts were. It was full of information about the contemporary situation of black families, and said a lot about the matriarchal family structure as he saw it, a heritage of slavery when marriage was illegal and women had no control over their children and men had no control over what happened to the people they had children with. He also talked a lot about what he called the startling increase in welfare dependency. He featured what later became known as Moynihan's scissors. Showed that up until the very early 60s, there was a strong correlation on a if you look at me, chart showing the rate of black male non-white unemployment. It was called then. The census didn't take blacks out. Non-white unemployment. Most of these were black, and the welfare take up with aid to families with dependent children, the FDC program, and this was parallel. Then starting in the early 60s, the unemployment rate, these were good years, starts to go down a little bit. It goes like this. There's a scissors here. So he said something's happening here. It's the illegitimacy rate is going up, or ratio, we should call it. It's not the rate. The percentage of births that are out of wedlock is going up, and unemployment is not going up quite so fast. Something else is happening. It's not just economics. Something deeper is happening to the black family. Then he had a longest chapter near the end called "The Tangle of Pathology," which left the impression, of course, that this was a desperate situation, and the blacks in these lower class families were living in a pathological situation. This was a liberal document, however. He started by saying that the reasons blacks have so much problem is because there is a racist virus in the American bloodstream. Describing the history of blacks in the United States, he said that they had suffered from, quote, 3 centuries of unimaginable mistreatment. There was not the slightest suggestion in here that Moynihan was regarding blacks having children out of wedlock as acting immorally. It was not a moralistic document. In fact, it was not even an uplifting document. He didn't, praise, for instance, the capacity of blacks to deal with all of this, as some people did with kin relationships. He thought to do that would make it seem as if he thought this was the answer, which he didn't. What he said, in fact, was not particularly striking to anybody who really knew what the situation was. Kenneth Clark's book, Dark Ghetto, for instance, said very much the same things as Moynihan did. In fact, the phrase
See?
tangle of pathology was Clark's. Clark was a black psychologist. Moynihan was a Catholic white guy.
Yeah, Kenneth Clark is the guy that did the black doll tests, just for reference.
A messenger carrying bad news. And you know about messengers, right? They get in trouble sometimes just because they're messengers.
Okay, this is the professor on his board. We're going to deal with this now. This is from the Moynihan Report, or the Negro American Family, and we're talking. In the clip we're talking about the tangle of pathology. So we're going to read from the text right now. Blah blah blah. We can skip down. It says the Negro community has not only survived, but in this political generation has entered national affairs as a moderate, humane, and constructive national force, is the highest testament to the healing powers of the democratic ideal and the creative vitality of the Negro people. But it may not be supposed that the Negro American community has not paid a fearful price for the incredible mistreatment to which it has been subjected over the past 3 centuries. Excuse me. In essence, the Negro community has been forced, say it with me now, been forced into a matriarchal structure, which, because it is so out of line with the rest of
came from the slave farms,
the American society, seriously retards the progress of the group as a whole and imposes a crushing burden on the Negro male, and in consequence, on a great many Negro women as well. This is presumably no special reason why society in which males are dominant in family relationships is to be preferred a matriarchal arrangement. However, it is clearly a disadvantage for a minority group to be operating on one principle, while the great majority of the population, and the one with the most advantages to begin with,
the infamous gynocracy we talk about, and look at where that gynocracy has led us. Look at the state of the black community.
Is operating on another. This is the present situation of the Negro. Ours is a society which presumes male leadership in private and public affairs. The arrangements of the society facilitate such leadership and reward it. As a subculture, which I've already said, the black community is a subculture such as that of the Negro American, in which this is not the pattern, is placed at a distinct disadvantage. It might be estimated that as much as half of the Negro community falls into the middle class. However, the remaining half is in desperate and deteriorating circumstances. Moreover, because of housing segregation, it is immensely difficult for the stable half to escape from the cultural influence of the unstable one. The children of middle-class Negroes often as not must grow up in or next to the slums and experience almost unknown to white middle-class children. They are therefore constantly exposed to the pathology of the disturbed group and constantly in danger of being drawn into it. It is for this reason that the propositions put forth in this study may be thought of as having more or less general application. In a word, most Negro youth are in danger of being caught up in the tangle of pathology that affects their world, and probably a majority are so entrapped. Many of those who escape do so for one generation only. That's for all these patriarchal middle class people that think they've escaped. As things are now, their children may have to run the gauntlet all over again. That is not the least vicious aspect of the world that white America has made for the Negro. Skipping down, a fundamental fact of Negro American life is that often reverse roles of husband and wife. Robert O. Blood Jr., Donald M. Wolfe, in a study of Detroit families, note that Negro husbands have unusually low power. And while this is a characteristic of all low-income families, the pattern pervades the Negro social structure. The matriarchal pattern of so many Negro families reinforces itself over the generations. This process begins with education, although the gap appears to be closed.
In other words, we've been in gynocracy for a very long time.
At the moment, for a long while, Negro females were better educated than Negro males. And this remains true today for the Negro population as a whole. As low as the aspirational level amongst lower class Negro girls, it is considerably higher amongst the boys. For example, I have examined the honor.
Although it may have flipped because this latest batch of the most educated, oh, good Lord.
Rolls in Negro high schools for about 10 years. As a rule, from 75 to 90% of all Negro honor students are girls. Now, here's the kicker, and I want Sergeant Willie Pete to pay special attention to this one, because I've been told this over and over by many, many people. I've seen this in my own life. I've heard this from my buddies, and I've also heard this on YouTube from many Black men. Historically, in the matriarchal Negro society, mothers made sure that if one of their children had a chance for higher education, the daughter was the one to pursue it.
What's good, Snowman?
The effect on family functioning and role performance of this historical experience, economic deprivation, is what you might predict. But as
this is coming directly from the Moynihan Report 60 years ago.
A husband and as a father, the Negro male is made to feel inadequate, not because he is unlovable or unaffectionate, lacks intelligence, or even a gray flannel suit. In other words, it doesn't matter about his status. But in society that measures a man by the size of his paycheck, he doesn't stand very tall in comparison with his white counterpart. To this situation, he may react with withdrawal, bitterness towards society, aggression, both within the family and racial group, self-hatred or crime, or he may escape through a number of avenues that help him lose himself in fantasy or to compensate for his low status through a variety of exploits, Doesn't this sound an awful lot like what's going on today? Okay, for the most part, modern marriage as we know it has its antecedents going all the way back 10,000 years to the beginning of the agricultural age. Its sole purpose is to assign a man or a man's labor to a family for the sole reason of producing children that the society.
By the way, I got 13 watching. Like, share, subscribe. Hit my Cash App, support the show. Hit the Super Chat, support the show. If you need more context, I do have the full Moynihan Report. Link it in my description. I also have the BGS's playlist on a Moynihan Report. And after this video, after we go over this video a little bit, we're gonna take a look at Dr. Tommy Curry and Dr. Torian Walker's video on the Moynihan Report.
Needs, or the tribe needs, whatever the human unit was. Now, it's taken many different variations on the same thing, but marriage basically is still basically the same form that it was 10,000 years ago. The production, the care and feeding of the human resources that human society needed. Because of high mortality rates, a human female needed to produce as many children as she could. Because if she didn't, eventually that people would starve and die out without that human labor from young people coming up. Obviously, what made this break was the Industrial Revolution, because what it did was divorce human labor from human production, because the machines that people built or that our culture built was a lot faster and more efficient at producing some of the same things, farming, textiles, and other goods that people depended on. It also produced new tools that made the work of labor more efficient. So starting in 1780, when the Industrial Revolution actually got going in northern Scotland, it started to replace people. And as it started to replace people, the need for the female fertility rate and her to produce as many children as possible started to go down. Okay, here's a chart of the total fertility rate of France and England, and pay particularly close attention to England, where the Industrial Revolution started. You can see as more food is available, you can see the increase of fertility at the beginning, but as the Industrial Revolution took hold, you can see the rapid drop in the fertility rates of females. You can see England's fertility rate drop from over 6 down to 2, which is barely replacement level. Here's a chart that's a little closer to home and maybe a little bit more familiar. You have the black and white fertility chart from 1800 on into the 21st century. It didn't surprise you that you see the same pattern that you see in England or the English chart. The white women, as the country industrialized, you can see the fertility rate drop dramatically from 7 children per woman all the way down to less than 2, which is below replacement. You see the same thing for black females, which were recorded coming out of slavery. The fertility rate is about a child higher and remains so for quite some time. But eventually, as their per capita income caught up with or became in sync with white women, their drop happened dramatically as well. You can see it's juxtaposed against the per capita income of the United States. And as the wealth of the country increases, the wealth of the people increases, the female fertility rate goes down or plummets. And it's obvious, you can see that it's inversely proportional to the fertility rate. In other words, you don't need children. Women don't need to produce children anymore. It's not a necessity as it was back in the 18th century and before. What is the original reason for marriage? is assigning a man's labor to a woman so that they can produce children or human resources that the society needs. What happens when the society does not need children? If this chart is any indicator, children aren't produced. So it would make sense that eventually the institution that was set up for the production of children would also see a similar effect. Now, it was difficult for me to find a historical marriage chart by itself, but this is what I did find, and it is interesting in itself. Here you can see that marriage since the industrial...
Now, unfortunately, we're below replacement rate when it comes to bearing children, and it's a problem. That's why women might start getting taxed for not being married over 30. Whoops.
Revolution, and as far back as I could find, it was 1860, but it will do, is basically flat with a couple of post-war spikes in 1920, which is a slight one, and then the big one, which was the post-war after 1940, after 1945. You saw a big spike right around there. Now you have some dips during the Depression, and then the post-baby boom dip in the 60s. It's flat again in the 70s and 80s, and then it starts its really steep decline, which is pretty much a similar picture all over the world. I could show you more charts, but I think this one will be sufficient. But look below it at the divorce rate chart in blue. Divorce is tiny, almost non-existent until the Depression. And then it becomes relevant. And then it becomes really relevant after 1970. Next chart, we're going to take a closer look at the divorce rate. Now, this chart probably doesn't need any introduction. You can see that divorce in the U.S. was almost non-existent for the most part until after the Great Depression. And then you had an explosion after the laws were changed during the Great Depression of divorce. And that explosion didn't stop until after World War II, when the troops came back from World War II and started to marry, and America had a golden age because basically it ruled the world. And that was fine again until the law started to change in the 60s. And then you had another huge explosion under no-fault divorce, probably the biggest ever. And that didn't abate until the...
Brought to you by Ronald Reagan.
1980s, where things started to taper off. And I would probably suspect, and I do believe it's correct, that the only reason that it tapered off is because the marriage rate went down. Here's an interesting one. It's basically the same charts that you saw before, but it's juxtaposed against the two world wars and the legislation as far as divorce is concerned. And it shows you how not only the environment, the world wars, but also the policies that the United States passed affected not marriage and divorce. You can look at it. The divorce was almost non-existent until the Matrimonial Causes Act was passed in 1937. And you can see the upward trend since then. And it's basically...
Now, 80 to 90% of Black women file for divorce. Now, let me say it again for niggles didn't hear me in the back. Now, 80 to 90% of Black women who get divorced are the ones that file for divorce.
The same until the...
This is a report from 60 years ago.
Explosion with the divorce reform or no-fault divorce. And like I said, the only thing that brought or leveled divorces out was the decline in marriage, the decline in matrimony. When you look at it from this perspective and you bundle all these things together and you start to connect the dots, you can see the effect that your environment, or the artificial environment that the Industrial Revolution created, drastically affect what people do. And it affects the dynamics between male and female, because the dynamics between male and female depend on children. Without that to bind them together, and without society's pressure to keep them together, they won't stay together. They're going to split up. You're going to have a divided family. You see, even though the Matrimonial Causes Act was passed in 1937, divorce was still rather flat until women entered the workforce and they had their own money. The same can be said in 1960. In the mid-60s, when more women went to college and more women went to work, the divorce rate spiked up. And then when you change the laws once more and make it easier, what's inside of her really spikes up and it really shows up. So nowadays, when you have nothing to bind these two people together, you don't have children, you don't have economics, and you don't have societal pressure, what's going to happen to marriage? It's becoming almost non-existent all over the world, especially in the industrialized world.
Yes.
Marriage is not a natural phenomenon. It is a human instrument that became an institution. It is there for a purpose. And when that purpose is no longer there, the instrument and the institution will cease to exist and something else will rise up in its place. So nowadays, marriage is a choice. It's a luxury. It's not a necessity like it used to be. Which is all I was saying, especially in this environment, which is all I tell my daughter. And it's what I told Chrissy, basically the same thing. This is what you're looking at. Okay, in conclusion, The reason I'm on YouTube and the reason I even got this channel is because after about 15 years of being involved with folks with politics and even economics of black folks and the black community, trying to figure it out and even coming up with some solutions, it finally dawned on me, as it probably dawned on Moynihan, that there was something else going on. Black folks weren't taking the solutions and applying them. They weren't moving. They weren't seeing the value in these solutions. So I knew there was something else going on. And then reading the Moynihan Report and hearing about it, it was that aha moment when you find the answer and you go, oh shit, I should have seen this from the beginning. And it's what Moynihan calls it. It's the tangle of pathology, of cultural pathology. Some call it post-traumatic slave syndrome, but they never, ever describe it in a way that you can get your hooks into it, because they talk about it through psychology and not culture. Black folks have become politically correct. And
what do we tell? What we always tell y'all? The matriarchy comes directly from the slave plantation. Comes directly from the slave plantation. I know it's rough to hear, but you know, a lot of us are still operating like we're off the slave plantation, and unfortunately, it shows. Look how some black people blindly vote for the Democratic Party. Yeah, I said it. Let's continue.
And we don't own up to our own bullshit. Like my partner, who's been in the game as far as black folks are concerned for about 40 years, he's been telling me for the last 20, 98% of all black folks need to be lying on somebody else's couch to get rid of all this cultural bullshit that we have going through our heads.
Pretty much.
We've been in this tangle and web of pathology for so long, we've gotten comfortable in it. And I've been on YouTube, I'm hearing the same crap. I
need to play that again. Give me 1 second, I need to play it again.
Bullshit I've been hearing for the last 30 years, and we don't own up to our own bullshit. Like my partner, who's been in the game as far as black folks are concerned for about 40 years, he's been telling me for the last 20, 98% of all black folks need to be lying on somebody else's couch to get rid of all this cultural bullshit that we have going through our heads. We've been in this tangle and web of pathology for so long, we've gotten comfortable in it. And I've been on YouTube, I'm hearing the same crap, same bullshit I've been hearing for the last 30 years, going back and forth and circulating. And nobody ever cuts that Gordian knot and finds out what's at the bottom of this. And when people do find out what's at the bottom of this, black folks don't want to accept it. Now, when I do my series on the Moynihan Report, I'm going to get deeper into this, and I'm going to bring some other sources into this. But for right now, we're going to pause this and we're going to talk about other things. SWP talks about solutions in the black community. There are tons and tons.
Hey, what's going on, Snowman?
I listen to this and remember everything that a lot of brothers like myself have gone through. And I remember my dad's words. Simple choice. Get out or get the hell out. And before my dad passed on, I said, Dad, I got the fuck out.
That gives me an idea, but one of the reasons I wanted to go over this, Dr. Tom McCurry and another doctor talked about this. And it's a Black Male Studies series. That's what we're going to watch next. But before I do that, I wasn't kidding. That is my new intro.
Dear Bear, you just got blown the hell up.
Yeah, well, that's what the AI gave me, and I loved it so much. I posted it.
Good. You should be proud of that. You absolutely should be proud of that, man.
But back to the subject. They covered the Moynihan Report, and the Moynihan Report was supposed to help black men, but the black intelligentsia rejected it.
Yep.
And so about this wayside, and look at the state of the black community now.
Mm-hmm.
But let's go ahead and go to Dr. Curry and Dr. I don't know why. Dr. Walker.
Plan in no order. What's the end result of that going to be?
Start from the beginning.
Hello, I'm Torin Walker. Welcome to episode 10 of the Black Male Study Sessions. This is a series of discussions and roundtables focused on addressing the issues affecting Black men and boys. The Black Male Study Sessions is sponsored by the African American Men's Historical Society. The AMHIS is a Black American men's intellectual society focused on the preservation and empowerment of Black men. Go to amhis.org to learn more and visit their Substack at amhis.substack.com. During his State of the Union,
Yep, quiet as it is kept. I'm a trained animator.
address on January 8, 1964. President Lyndon Baines Johnson proposed legislation that would expand the federal government's role in education and healthcare and poverty reduction strategies.
Mm-hmm.
This legislation came to be known as the War on Poverty, which was seen as the spiritual successor to Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal enacted to counter the mass unemployment, homelessness, and social upheaval of the Great Depression. In that inaugural address, Johnson stated, "Our aim is not only to relieve the system of poverty, but to cure it, and above all, to prevent it." One of the major battlegrounds of that war was alleviating chronic poverty in Black American communities. And one of the guiding battle plans of that fight was a government study officially titled The Negro Family, the Case for National
In other words, the Moynihan Report.
Action, written in 19...
By the way, as I stated before, the Moynihan Report is listed in my description as a PDF if you want to download it. I also have BGS entire playlist on link to BGS entire playlist on the Moynihan Report. And I have this video linked too.
And I have all three saved in my history. You know what makes it so bad? This was kept, and I'm not blaming anybody in the manosphere because I kept hearing this report being hinted at. But growing up, this was kept from me.
It's kept from everybody. Don't feel bad.
Well, I know this shit.
I didn't hear about the Moynihan Report till I got here, and BGS was talking about it.
Yeah, that's basically when I heard it. You know, and people get pissed at Jody and me when we have conversations about shit like this, which is a daily conversation for us, and we don't care. We love talking about this and getting the truth out. You hear me? The truth.
Labor Daniel Patrick Moynihan. That study came to be known as the Moynihan Report. The effect of the war on poverty on Black communities was the effective removal of Black males from the home, creating a climate of hostility to Black men by Black women, a lack of male mentorship for Black children, and the disruption of the overall Black community. And I wanted to unpack some of these issues as to why we got here with Professor Tommy J. Curry. Most of you know Professor Tommy J. Curry is one of the seminal authors of Black Male Studies. He is the MPH Personal Chair of Africana Philosophy of Black Male Studies, Department of Philosophy at the University of Edinburgh School of Philosophy, Psychology, and Language Sciences. And he is most known for being the author of the book, The Man Not, Race, Class, Genre, and the Dilemmas of Black Manhood, winner of the 2018 American Book Award, and a foundational text in the field of Black Male Studies. Professor Curry, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, sir. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. Thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to have this conversation. I always appreciate it when you're able to come through.
No, I always appreciate the invitation, brother.
All right, so let's get right into it. How did this legislation that was supposed to remedy the conditions in Black America open the door for them to get worse?
Well, the thing that a lot of people don't understand about the Moynihan Report is that it is the product of decades of research on Black communities. So what Daniel P. Moynihan does in his report on the Negro family is actually try to accumulate the cutting edge research on the Black American personality. So the report centers on two major aspects of Black families and Black communities. The first is that discrimination in the United States has psychological effects on Black people. He largely relies on the work of Mitchell and what later became known as the marshmallow test to measure delayed gratification, suggesting that because Black men didn't have the same kind of economic and social opportunities that other groups have had, especially poor Black men, that they couldn't delay gratification. So they didn't see the benefits of pursuing education like their Black female counterpart. The second thing that I think, and this
Well, on top of the fact it wasn't encouraged for black men to get education. And oftentimes they were encouraged to drop out of school and help the family work. But what's that you posted in the chat earlier, Snowman? You were taught to go get, quote unquote, get a job.
This is why I see people debating more.
Oh, you must be doing something. All right, let's continue.
On social media is this question of the matriarchal family or the female-led household. Now, that piece becomes a little bit more difficult because it's a highly politicized argument in the Black community. Most Black feminists and pop culture kind of pundits articulate the Moynihan Report as saying that because the Black community is matriarchal, that's responsible for the failures of the Black race in the United States. And they see it as scapegoating Black women for the failures of the race, where patriarchy becomes the solution, so to speak. That's a half truth, right? So the debates over the Moynihan Report actually failed to trace out the assumptions of Moynihan. And what ends up happening is we have kind of an argument about identity politics rather than the social science that he was actually using. So what Moynihan was saying, and this is on the basis of people like John Dollard and Thomas Pettigrew, was that discrimination was so severe for Black men that it eliminated any ability for them to actually be heads of households, right? So say, for example, like if you actually read the Moynihan Report, he constantly citing Thomas Pettigrew's book, A Profile of the Negro American. And in that book, Thomas Pettigrew actually argues that employment discrimination has made it more difficult for poorly educated Black men to get secure employment than poorly educated Black women. So the effect of that was that poor Black...
In other words, Black women have always had an edge when it comes to getting jobs. But a lot of Black women will never tell you that shit.
Black men did not have the ability to form typical American households where they were the head of household and allowed for stable family units. This is the same thing that E. Franklin Frazier discussed when he was studying Black families, that Black men would actually have to leave cities to find employment elsewhere, and this would create the absence of the father figure, right? Now, Thomas Pettigrew didn't pull this out of thin air. He didn't just make it up. He actually got it from a white boy named John Dollard. He was educated at the University of Chicago, and in the early 1930s, he was a professor at Yale University. Now, he wrote a book called Casting Class in a Southern Town. And if you allow me, I'd like to just read a quote from this because I think it really contextualizes how much people misunderstand and misrepresent what's going on in the Moynihan Report for their own ideas, okay? So Dollard actually...
Like, share, subscribe, hit the Cash App, support the show. Hit the Super Chat, support the show.
He says, look, when Jim Crow made his appearance towards the end of the 19th century, it may be speculated that it was the Negro male who was most humiliated thereby. The male was most likely to use public facilities, which rapidly became segregated once the process began. And just as important, segregation and the submissiveness it exacts is surely more destructive to the male than the female personality. So keeping the Negro in his place can be translated as keeping the Negro male in his place. The female was not a threat to anyone. Unquestionably, those events worked against the margins of a strong father figure, right? So when we're looking at the Moynihan Report, we have to understand that the claims about the matriarchal household does not just appear. Like, Moynihan's not making the statement just out of thin air, right? He's saying that this happens because the basis of Black people in the United States come about because the system of segregation has deliberately targeted Black men. Now, what's important is that John Dollard makes the exact same claim back in the 1930s. Dollard fundamentally believes that to be a Black man in Jim Crow was about making sure that Black men could not have any kind of economic potential, right? And to make sure that Black men could not intermarry. So his whole book is about how Jim Crow segregation was about making sure Black men knew their inferior position, whereas Black women, because white men had unfettered access to them sexually, could walk across the line, the color line more.
Yep. Where you think that redheaded stepchild came from? Happened all the time. If we don't believe white men have always had access to Black women, just read Daughters of the Trade. You'll get a whole different perspective.
For freely. So whereas a white man can have sex and give gifts to Black women, if a Black man even thought about looking at a white woman or having a sexual desire for her, he was immediately lynched, right? So we have to understand.
Do we need to talk about Emmett Till? Oh, and by the way, just FYI, he was the 9th body they found in that river.
Understand that Moynihan is building from a history of white sociology that's relying on people like Pettigrew, people like John Dollard, and even people like Mitchell. Because Mitchell's argument, again, was that because Black men could not see the long gains.
What's going on, Laws? We're talking about the Moynihan Report today. You want to take a look at it yourself? It's in my description.
of education, that you would never be able to have black men make long-term sacrifices, or short-term sacrifices, excuse me, for long-term gains. So the Moynihan Report talks about female-headed households, but only insofar as they're a product. And this is what's constantly missing from the discussion because it's politicized. Only insofar as they are a product of black men, of lower class black men specifically, being discriminated against throughout Jim Crowism, right? He doesn't believe that this is the case for middle class black households, which is why I find it ironic that you have a bunch of academics politicizing the Moynihan Report about black female-led households when he's very specifically talking about poor black people. Now the question of patriarchy that black feminists continue to harp on, it becomes somewhat anachronistic.
But he still talks about that mentality that seeps in from the lower class to the middle class, and now 70% of your households are single mothers. I can always butcher that term from Clark, the pathology. I always butcher that term, but basically, he was right. They didn't do anything about it, and it spread, and now 70% of your black households are headed by single mothers.
In this,
and now the majority of your kids, including the girls, can't read.
Right? Because it's aspirational. There were no black patriarchs during this period of time. The whole Moynihan Report, as well as John Dolan and Thomas Pettigrew, which is constantly cited in it, are saying that, listen, segregation and racism was so bad that poor black men did not have the ability to be patriarchs or lead households. Remember, I spoke about this earlier last year when we discussed domestic violence. One of the things that was
the gynocracy has been around for a very long time.
Thought during this period of time in the 1960s by University of Chicago educated sociologists. I'm thinking here, of course, about LeBeau's book, Tally's Corner, is that poor black men did not deserve the respect of their spouses, right? So Thomas Pettigrew, for instance, says that black women actually resented black men who were unable to care for their family, which was more typical of bourgeois family arrangements and even middle class black family arrangements, right? You have people like LeBeau saying the same thing, where he gives the account of a woman who beats her husband because she didn't think he was a real man. He couldn't provide for her. He couldn't lead the household. So throughout white sociology, you've always had this emphasis on what we would now call the gender wars between black men and black women. But those things don't start as the product of a political difference in the 1960s. These ideas are manifested throughout the 20th century, when you have white sociologists going all the way back to Hannah Arendt, who wrote Soul Side, saying that because black men were not real men, and this is the terminology they use, black women demonstrated hostility and lack of respect for them. So this, and I'm not saying that that's true, because remember, this is from the lens of white researchers. But what I'm saying is that what's happening in social media, what's happening over Twitter, what's even happened in the academy, is you've taken one particular interpretation of the Moynihan Report, and that becomes your Cliff Notes version for the test. You don't go back and read Thomas Pettigrew. You're not reading Mitchell's arguments on delayed gratification. You're not reading Dollard, and you're saying, oh, this is all about the female-led household. But you've missed the whole part where these white sociologists are.
Damn, I'll give BGS all that help about the Moynihan Report. I only got 4 watching. Oh, well.
Arguing, well, Jim Crow and economic discrimination is decimating black men's ability to even find work. So they can't be productive members within the household. And then they psychologize them, saying that because they can't contribute economically, the black woman disrespects them and attacks them, right? So going so far as people like Wolfgang and Farrakhan saying that black women kill and beat black men within the household because of this dynamic, and black men don't have any incentive to complete education. So whereas black women complete education and become more degreed, black men turn away, which is why Moynihan says they should join, say, the army or things of that, because they don't see, they can't delay gratification and see the long-term benefits of pursuing a college degree. Now that complexity is lost. And what ends up happening is we're having fights with each other about racist social science that neither one of us offered. Right? Black male sociologists like Robert Staples didn't support the Moynihan Report. He didn't believe that you can reduce family organization to the single cause of black people's economic and political failures. He thought white supremacy and racism was responsible for that. You have numerous people like even Dorothy Hyatt, who published or who was quoted in the report to Roosevelt before the Moynihan Report, which even talks about the discrimination of black men and the dehumanization and targeting of black men, and how part of the civil rights gains is to give black men respect because they've been dehumanized. And people, now, of course, she was middle class. She had a very Christian and nuclear family outlook. But the conversation that black people are attending to the specific discrimination and targeting of black men was nothing that was gender related. It was what the race thought during this period of time, given the science. So it's a misrepresentation that's completely anachronistic to attack each other. And I see this on social media, black people to attack each other for a report that they didn't author. And most people certainly don't understand.
I want to go through the key conclusions of the Moynihan Report. It's a very comprehensive study, but there are 4 key conclusions. I'm going to go through the first 2 here. The Moynihan Report said that the condition of the Black community and the economic condition of the Black community came down to 4 key things. The first was the legacy of slavery and racism. The report emphasized that historical oppression, particularly slavery,
yes, indeedy,
systemic racism, disrupted traditional family structures and continued to affect the social and economic stability of African American families. The second one was family structure, as you mentioned before, was central to understanding Black poverty. The Moynihan Report argued that the high rate of single mother households in the Black community was a central factor contributing to poverty, social disorganization, and inequality. He claimed that what he coined a tangle of pathology had developed, rooted in the breakdown of the nuclear family. Now, I just want to stop at those 2 points right there, because nothing in either one of those points is anything inherently that says that anything about Black women or Black mothers is inherently bad. This is just laying out the condition.
and that is by design. That's why Black women can get a job, get a job easier than you can. It's always been like that, but Black women of today will never admit that shit came from the plantation. The ones that know, they'll never admit it. Sadly.
Issues for why things are the way they are. So my question to you is, how did the Moynihan Report get interpreted through the decades as being anti-Black women?
Well, I mean, I think there's a few things, because I do believe the Moynihan Report is anti-Black, right? The problem is that the culture of poverty arguments that are starting by people.
What did he say wrong, Dr. Curry?
Like Oscar Lewis presuppose that there are certain cultural arrangements that differ from the white race. That means that certain racial groups are not viable, right? So think of it like this. Descriptively, you're right. Those things don't sound like, anything controversial. But if you understand the science behind it, you would say, okay, Black people live in a cultural arrangement where poverty, delayed gratification, or the inability to delay gratification, and deviance grow. Because that's what these cultural poverty theorists were arguing, okay? The assumption behind that, though, right, that we have a different configuration of family that's responsible for us not progressing politically, completely overlooks the role that contemporary racism have. Because remember, Pettigrew is saying, look, Black men suffer from economic discrimination that produces many of these psychological attitudes where they don't value education. But that's not true. Black men fought against segregation. They fought for education. So you're still dealing with these very kind of
that we did
white-centered views of Black deficiency and deficit. And I think that's where the issue comes in. Now, listen, the problem that I think we are dealing with today is because we have one particular interpretation of this story, which comes dominantly from Black feminism. So Black feminists look at that and say, you're saying that the pathology and downfall of the race is the fault of Black women. And to a certain extent, Moynihan, Pettigrew, et cetera, do make that claim. But the claim is on a cultural basis, that because Black women are in Black-led households, Black households are led by Black women, this produces deviance, it produces hope.
Yeah, it does. The last 60 years prove that. 70% of your households are led by single mothers now, and look at the state of the Black community.
Homosexuality, according to these racist theories, and it produces criminality, right? That's what's happening during this period of time. But they exclude the fact that Black men are structurally isolated as well. It's not to call for patriarchy on behalf of Black men. It's the same kind of deficit theories that the people have been writing about since the 1920s concerning Black communities. And that's what's being isolated, right? That's what's being forgotten. Black feminism is using it as a political point, where in reality, it's an anti-Black point that ridicules the position that Black men have historically been put in because they're not white men.
I just find it interesting that, first of all, the Moynihan Report is very comprehensive, like I said, and it takes a lot of time to sit down and actually read through everything and basically to interpret it. I'm just fascinated by the fact that one particular
it's around 60 pages.
Part of the report and part of its conclusions was taken completely out of context, or all these different points of view were added to it without anybody really engaging with the text itself.
Well, but I mean, listen, this is what happens in the academy, right? I mean, is Moynihan comprehensive? Certainly for its time in the 1960s, it was a comprehensive document based on white social science, okay? But what I'm trying to highlight, though, is that we're using a document that most Black sociologists disagree with, right? Like, sure, we know that single-led households or single-mother households tend to be poor, but that's because there's one person in it. It's not because of the unique condition or pathology of Black women.
Actually, it shows that single fathers actually do better than single mothers when it comes to raising kids. So, yeah.
Moynihan presupposed that Black culture, because it was affected by segregation and racism, was fundamentally lacking. It was deficient in some way. And then he created this different model saying, well, we need to repair it by making it more in line with white family structures. The background of that, however, is the attack, decimation, and humiliation of Black men, because they were the ones that were excluded in a Jim Crow society from being productive members of society. That's why people like Moynihan actually say, listen, to keep the Negro in his place, right, it's actually meant to keep the black man in his place. So what we've done, as usual, is miss the fact that black men have
No, he just said that we needed more work. We need equal opportunity.
been targeted in a very specific and deliberate way, and that this has a direct effect on the outcomes for the community at large. We've ignored the political economy of the doctrine and focused on the identity politics of the doctrine.
Let's get into the practice of poverty legislation. Social programs under the War on Poverty were, for the most part, administered by white liberals, and that administration was in many cases disruptive to the potential of black men and black women to even create stable families. In many cities like Chicago and Oakland and other places, black single mothers were penalized if social workers found evidence of an adult male living in subsidized housing.
Very
There's
true.
this movie that came out
Very
at the time called
true.
Claudine, came out around 1973, I believe. That highlighted this problem. It was with Diane Carroll and James Earl Jones. That basically one of the main plot points was this woman who was trying to create a relationship with a man who was, she was a housekeeper, he was a garbage man, and she had a lot of different, about 4 or 5 children in her household, boys and girls. But there was several scenes in that movie where every time a social worker would come by who was a white liberal woman, he either had to run out of the window or hide in the closet. That was something that actually was documented at that time. Can you talk a little bit about the benevolent malevolence of some of the white liberals who said they wanted to benefit black communities, but this is what ended up happening, the way it was implemented?
Well, look, I mean, but listen, lots of the discussions around this period of time, around the absence of black men, was that it was forced, it was legislated, right? And here's what's crazy, right? So, in 1963, you had a report on the problems of Negro women. It was commissioned by under John F. Kennedy. Okay, in that report, Dorothy Hyatt was very clear that you could not protect black women unless you repaired the status of black men and his position in the community. Now, remember, Moynihan comes about a few years later, right? 65. So what ends up happening to Moynihan is he completely overlooks the fact that black women are saying that black men and women are interdependent. He thinks that it's purely the structure. So what you've done is you've then introduced a policy that tries to keep black men separate from black women, and then have black women be completely reliant on the state for their livelihood and their livelihoods, right? So the effect of this policy was to remove father figures. It was to remove the idea that black men are viable members of the community. It was to increase the susceptibility that the black community had to negative stereotypes and associations of black masculinity and black maleness with deviance, right, and criminality. And it allowed us to talk about a black community without the need for black men. So this is why I'm always telling people that, and this is what I find interesting in the academy as well, is black people tend to have a much stronger tolerance for mythology as the guiding basis of research and interpretation than other groups of people. And what I mean by that specifically is that given the position that we've endured in the United States, there's a tendency that we have to internalize and think with negative stereotypes where we become exceptions to the rule rather than a general consolidation of positive value for the whole group. And this is particularly important in this case because black academics either are middle class or aspire to be middle class in the United States. So as I talk about in The Man Not, there's this need to distance themselves from a problem population, which is what they see poor black men as. So in removing black men from households, they accept that's what's needed. They accept that the basis by which we could better ourselves and actually have stable communities don't require black men. But that's not a conclusion on the basis of any sociological study or understanding. That's a conclusion based in the reality by which the poverty that black people suffered in and the state assistance that was offered to single black mothers, comes with the caveat that black men have to be absent. So the question of black male absenteeism is not formulated purely on black male choice. It's formulated on state incentives that want black men to be absent. And this plays several roles. It reinforces the structural poverty of the black community. And also, it takes away the idea that black men are active participants or even could be participants, much less leaders, of black resistance against a system of white supremacy. So this is engineered. It's part of domestic colonization.
Yes, it's by design.
It's part of the resocialization apparatus of the black community at large. And it solidifies the structural position that black men have had within black communities as being considered problems, deviants, and unworthy and useless to the overall health of our people. So I think we have to be very careful when we talk about these kinds of histories without having a critical eye.
Just to do a little house cleaning. First of all, thank you for tuning in to the Black Male Study Sessions. The Black Male Study Sessions is sponsored by the African American Men's Historical Society. AMHIS is a Black American Men's Intellectual Society focused on the preservation, history, and empowerment of Black men. Go to amhis.org to learn more and visit their Substack at amhis.substack.com. Dr. Curry, I want to dive a little bit deeper into what you just said. You mentioned the fact that some of these policies were put in place to basically remove Black men from the family structure and also remove them from being in positions of power or even being in positions of resistance or potential resistance. Can you open that up a little bit more and talk a little bit about why that was so important?
Well, I mean, I think it was important for a lot of different reasons. I mean, the most obvious, and this is what current research talks about, is the economic stability of Black households. Black men are major contributors to the economic stability of Black households. I think politically, though, there's a larger point there, considering what we know Dorothy Hyatt was discussing, in her report in '63.
Yeah, quiet as it's kept. Big Mama wouldn't have that house if it wasn't for Grandpa. But a lot of people don't want to talk about that. Big Mama would not have that house if it wasn't for Grandpa working. But we don't want to talk about that. In fact, once Grandpa passes away, y'all forget about forget about Grandpa and only worry about Big Mama.
Right? Hyatt thought that the Black community could only advance if Black men were considered important to it, if they weren't seen as street men, so to speak, that they were active roles of fathers, husbands, and they played a role in the political future and contributions of the whole society. You see, in the mid-1960s, there was not the same idea that we have today. Right? You didn't have Black female leaders necessarily saying that to be a Black man meant you were patriarchal. This is a post-1970s, 1980s kind of rhetoric. Because previously to that, before Black feminism, you can't find a quote in any social scientific document, or even, I don't even find a mention of it. And I've been researching this for almost a decade, of Black men being referred to as patriarchs. So it means that the association with male domination and Black males.
Yeah, there's never been a Black patriarchy. So listen to these Black feminists, they don't know what they're talking about.
Is a relatively recent invention of academics and not of Black activists, be they male or female. Given that reality, the removal of Black men from households, right, functions as a way to consolidate the power of white supremacy, because there's no messaging of resistance, there's no messaging of dissent coming from Black men. And I think that explains not only the reasons that we have such negative views about Black men that we're currently fighting today, but it also explains the proliferation of a certain kind of Black feminist ideology among middle-class Black people that can't really be explained in the uptake of feminist ideology by other groups. So take, for example, this, right? Anytime that we talk about Black people, and we mean this academically in activist spaces on social media, the first kind of interpretive lens that's presented is Black feminism. Now think about this. When we have any other conversation in the world, even about women, in a majority white society, white people don't necessarily start with feminism. They could start with economic problems. They can start with political underrepresentation. They could start with, God knows, international relations. There's tons of different things that affect how the dominant group interpret their reality. But with Black people, it's almost always single-minded. It's a question of how Black men perform, how Black men participate, and how Black men can be blamed or put in antagonistic relationships with Black women. And we.
Yep. In other words, gentlemen, it always comes down to this.
I'm done with life, and it's all Jermaine's fault. It's always Jermaine's fault. I'm done.
That's what it comes down to. Hold on, wait a minute.
We saw this completely during the period of the election with Donald Trump. Even when Black men were overwhelmingly supportive of a Democratic president or candidate, though I don't necessarily think they should have been, they were blamed as supporting Trump. And they definitely shouldn't have supported him. So the views.
Well, I did. So you're just gonna have to get over that, doctor.
Views that we have are dictated by the absence of Black men that's being conveyed in social.
He was the lesser of two evils.
Into us, both academically through Black feminism and socially through state intervention and tyranny and violence, right? So we have to, what we see now as the gender wars, Torian, are more so the product of decades of socialization. These are not naturally occurring phenomena. No group of people naturally grow up hating one another, especially when they're birthed from one another. And what we've done is we've used societal conditions and racism to dictate what we actually think the divisions and the boundaries between Black men and Black female interests are. And that's perpetuated by policy, right? And now we're in a situation where the government's bringing back segregation in a very real sense. So now everybody's the same. And we don't have Black solidarity.
Where are they bringing back segregation? Where? Anyway.
Solidarity by an extent that will allow us to actually benefit from confronting things together, because we're still trying to divide each other and take each other apart. So the Moynihan Report is just a symbol of that. It's a remnant of the kinds of ideas that said that there was not an interest necessarily for black men and women to be together, rather just imitate white structures. And the removal of black men from households based on welfare or social work policies in the United States was a way to justify and rationalize the elimination of black.
Yeah, but they did the Moynihan Report in order to bring down the cost of welfare. In other words, get black women off the system, but black women didn't want to get off the system.
Men from communities, because black women who were single mothers saw more economic and social capital being gained with the absence of black men by their reliance on the government, rather than black men actually being in their communities and their households.
I'm taking a look at some data right now and some of the effects of some of these policies that you mentioned. When it came to getting resources,
if you guys want to watch the rest of that, you can do it later. All those links are in the description. I'm about to shut it down now. I'd like to thank everybody that came through. This is ABMedia83, and I'm out. Peace. Yo, this is ABMedia83. To support the channel, hit the Cash App. Also, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the video. Also, be sure to hit that bell notification so you can be notified the next time I upload a live stream, video, or short. And always, always remember, guard your image, guard your peace. Keep it moving. This is ABMedia83, and I'm out. Peace.